Welcome to Restoring Memory, a COVID Calls exploration of the first two COVID years. My name is Scott Gabriel Knowles. I'm a historian of disasters, and since March 16th, 2020, I've been the host of COVID Calls, a daily discussion of the pandemic with a diverse collection of disaster experts. This is episode number 481, March 16th, 2022, Life and Death in Delta and Omicron with Cassie Alexander. And I'm going to jump right into the conversation today and let me introduce my guest. And she's no stranger to COVID calls and anybody who follows COVID calls. Cassie Alexander is a registered nurse of 14 years and an author. As Cassandra, she's written The Year of the Nurse, a 2020 COVID-19 pandemic memoir. As Cassie, she's written numerous paranormal romances with vampires, werewolves, and dragon shifters. And it's my pleasure, as always, to bring Cassie Alexander back to COVID Calls. Good to see you.
Hi, Scott. It's nice to be here. I just want people watching this, if anybody, to know that it's very early where I live.
I have to say, like, the demands, I invited people to come back for this special 28 episode collection, and some of the invitations were just not fair at all. They're like, "Can you join me at midnight? Can you join me at 7 a.m.?" And everyone said yes. So I owe you a couple hours of sleep. I don't know how to pay that. I don't know what currency is, but I'm really glad you could join me today.
Me too. No, I wouldn't have said yes if I hadn't wanted to be here.
So let's start. Actually, I was talking with my stepmom and my mother-in-law on COVID calls just a few days ago. It was a really great conversation with them. And they both, I think they've listened to more COVID calls than anybody else. And they're like deep listeners. They listen all the way through the episode. And they think a lot of you. And my stepmom's been reading your book. And so I wanted to ask you about Year of the Nurse now. It's been out there and circulating a while. What kind of feedback are you getting?
Good feedback. It's funny. So for people who aren't aware of my saga, I'll give you the brief version. Basically, I volunteered to take care of COVID patients in just this week, 2 years ago, actually. In 2020, I work in an ICU, and I did that until late April 2021. And then I kind of had a breakdown at work, and I realized I'm messed up. Basically, I was like, why am I keeping people alive when I would rather be dead, is what I texted my friends, who then texted my husband, who then was like, come home. So, and because of my history as a writer, and because I had journaled so much during taking care of COVID patients, I had all this material to kind of create a memoir out of my experiences that first year. And so that's how Year of the Nurse was born. And I'm going to be one of those corny people who holds their book up because I brought it in here just in case you asked questions. So this is what it looks like. And so I also had the capability to self-publish it because I had done that sort of thing before. And so I put it out July of this past year. So I went from being pretty broken in April to making this the whole thing that was keeping me busy, that I was going to get better by doing, I hoped. And it really did help me to coordinate my thoughts about what had happened to me during COVID, and to take time to kind of, I don't want to say honor what I had been through, but that's probably the best phrase for it. To see what I had actually gone through, because when you're in the trenches, it's all just a blur. And so, and then I got it out there, and my reviews are fantastic. If you happen to look it up on any site, actually, a 4.7 or something on Amazon, which is redonkulous. But since then, though, anytime anybody ever sells what's going to be a COVID memoir, one of my other nerdy publishing friends will send me a link, and they're like, oh my gosh, this, some paramedic someplace is gonna, write a book. And I'm excited for those people. Everybody who's in healthcare should be writing about their experiences, because it's really helpful to see on a page what happened to you, and to get a chance to understand it from a slight distance. And so sometimes I'd be like, oh gosh, maybe I should have pitched this to a traditional publisher. maybe I should have waited and gotten more attention, but I needed to get it out there because I needed to feel seen, because last July was before Delta hit. And so I was worried that we were all going to be forgotten, kind of like we are being now that Omicron is done. And I just, I knew there was a need for it. And so I actually got a really, really sweet fan mail that I'll read to you. I got this like 2 days ago, and I get things like this pretty regularly, and they're always very sweet and very humbling, like all the fan mail I get about Year of the Nurse. So this is another nurse who messaged me on Twitter. Cassie. First off, thank you for being entirely you and stepping up to write a book that so many of us needed. I'm an MICU, guess I can finally stop referring to myself as a COVID ICU nurse, from Pennsylvania. I just finished reading Year of the Nurse and truly have never felt so understood. If I was a kid writing an essay about who I want to be when I grow up, I would choose you. Personal aside, that makes me feel really old, and I'm not, but oh well. While I started out in my nursing career in entirely COVID ICU, the emotions I have felt and the experience I have had will shape me forever, as you very much know. I often find myself overcome with emotions while watching something even remotely sad on TV, just as you described in your book, and haven't had the strength to book an appointment to see a therapist until I read your words. I will now be passing along your book to two of my very eager coworkers who started in the ICU with me, and then hopefully to my boyfriend who's Republican, who I love dearly, but who I've been working with to understand my life and viewpoint for the past 2 years. I think your words could do it. My fingers are crossed for her. I know you probably received thousands of messages like this and might never even read this DM, but thank you for helping me to find some peace in the experiences we have been through. You are incredible, and I hope you are well. And so yeah, so I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish. You know, I made myself better, and I made the world a measurably better place for other nurses like me. So
Thanks for reading that, and I mean, it's really powerful. There's one detail in there that really made me sit up straight, and this is a nurse who's only ever known ICU work in a COVID context.
Yeah, there's a lot of those out there. Yeah.
I don't know how to even process that. I mean, how do you? I mean, you don't want to say something like this is as bad as you'll ever see.
But it's absolutely true, though. I mean, and to some degree, if you can have survived the past couple of years as a nurse, you can do anything. But you will have been broken in some way. Like I know for sure that I was broken. I have an excellent piece of paper from my psychiatrist saying that I was broken. But yeah, COVID nursing obviously was just not normal nursing, and I think it'll be probably hard for people who were raised up in that, so to speak, to come back to being normal, because they don't even know what normal is like. Yeah.
I want to come back to something you said a minute ago. Did you have before COVID a sense of writing as a mental health practice?
Yeah, probably. My first book series, I just got the rights back to. It was traditionally published. That began with Night Shifted, and it was the story of a nurse who worked on a ward for vampire exposed humans. And that was just like me dealing with being a new nurse and working the night shift and thinking I was going to kill somebody all the time on accident, or they were going to kill me, probably on purpose, because I worked at a rough hospital. And so, yeah, I've had people read that book and be like, I know where you worked. And I'm like, yes, you are right. You could tell that is the facility that I worked at, because I described it so well in that book. So, yeah.
So turning that into fiction was a way that and did it actually make you feel better? I'm sort of curious about the actual dynamics of that. You get it out on the page?
It's empowering in a way, you know, when you get to pull your experiences out of you, and then I mean, in fiction, obviously you get to be like the queen of your realm. You get to make the endings better. You get to like be in control of what's happening to you and stuff. So I think fiction is hugely empowering. I feel like that's why a lot of people write fan fiction or write self-insert fan fiction too about properties that they enjoy, because it's fun to be a part of something, and it's fun to have like a little distance from it and to be able to like control the narrative.
And paranormal romance, as opposed to other kinds of fiction genres that you could choose, does that enable, I mean, particularly, for a nurse? I mean, and I ask this because, I mean, there's a lot of, with shape-shifting, there's a lot of body stuff going on, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, I enjoy the opera. I am a body horror kind of person, and all of my books are kind of intense and have like high drama. It's I kind of joke they have like CW levels of angst with HBO motivation. I don't know if you were familiar with the CW channel out there in Korea, Scott, but it's like very angsty. Yeah. But also, so the body horror stuff is fun because paranormal romance allows you to be very, very dark, but then also have like a romance streak, and that's one of the reasons why I enjoy it. And I think you kind of nailed that, actually, because you can have fairly gruesome things happen, which is good because I'm pretty morbid. But then also have this strong streak where a hero and a heroine make the best of the situation and get out alive or happily undead. So.
Why did you go into nursing, Cassie?
I became a nurse basically so I could afford to write. So I've always wanted to be a writer. So I became a nurse because I lived in the Bay Area, and it was back in the day. And I did talk about that in my book a little bit. So sorry for people who read my book. I wanted to be Michael Crichton basically because I had thought that he had become a doctor and got rich and then retired to write books that I loved, like Jurassic Park. And it wasn't until I started reading You're the Nurse that I found out he only went to medical school. And so he like somehow translated medical school into like 20 years of ER, the TV show. And he didn't have to bother with being a doctor that whole time. But when I went to college part one, I thought I was going to be a doctor. So I did all my prereqs. And then when I went to college, then I realized, I can be a nurse, live in the Bay Area, work part-time, and write. And that's why I became a nurse, basically, as a means to an end. I do enjoy it, but it is a hard job.
And the hard aspects of it were within a tolerable range.
Yeah, because I've always been morbid, even beforehand. So, yeah. I mean, my first 10 years nursing were on a burn unit. So I kind of jumped into the deep end, and I loved it.
So just a quick reminder that you're listening to COVID Calls, and I'm talking to Cassie Alexander today. I want to talk to you today, particularly about the Delta and Omicron waves, and I think it's particularly relevant to where we just were in our conversation. So you wrote Year of the Nurse after coming out of that sort of first wave of the pandemic, and the Bay Area was hit first in the United States. So you're at the tip of the spear there, and you were worried in the summer of 2021 that people were already, the pandemic was going into the memory hole. And I think, I think that's a valid concern. And then the book comes out, and then Delta and Omicron hit.
Yeah.
What were I guess the first question I want to ask you about that is kind of a clinical one. What were you watching, or how did you first realize like, we're going back into this now?
Hopping back real fast, just because I don't want to throw any shade on. I feel like New York City was definitely the spear tip. They got it way, way, way worse than we did. I've always been fairly lucky out here in the Bay Area. We have gotten things faster, but because of our higher propensity for masking and vaccinations, we've been much more lightly hit than so many other parts in the United States. So I just wanted to give my other friends props in other states for the horrors that they have seen that have been far greater than me. Gosh, it was just with a rising sense of horror last July after I got Year of the Nurse out, because I I just remember such shitty mixed messaging, you know. It's like, oh, you don't have to wear masks unless you're unvaccinated. So that made it look like if you were wearing a mask that you were an unvaccinated asshole, as opposed to just being somebody who is super considerate or super safe. And because I visited a friend up in Portland for like in that brief window of safety. And I just remember thinking, there's no way this can end well if something else happens. And then boom, like we were caught flat-footed again. And I happened to luckily break my ankle. And so I missed another 3 months of work. And so I missed a lot of the Delta wave, but I was around for all of the Omicron. And it's a really weird feeling to see people run towards the spinning knives repeatedly. To just, you know, masking is such an easy thing to do, and vaccination is such an easy thing to do. But like, my own parents have told me that they're not going to get boosted. And I'm a nurse, so just fuck my life. You know, like, why would you, you know, why is that a thing that people think that it's okay to not get vaccinated? And, you know, I know that, you know, we can lay that squarely at the feet of the Republican Party and Fox News, who for some reason have decided that being obstreperous about public health is going to win them votes instead of kill people. I've had to divorce myself a lot from worrying about the United States as a whole, though, and other people. And I've really just narrowed my bandwidth down to only caring about the people who truly matter to me, because I can't afford to be as expansive with my emotions as I used to be when I started off, you know, back when I thought that I could make a difference. I mean, I make a small difference with my books and stuff, and people like my newsletter and my Twitter feed, but that's very much preaching to the choir at this point. I don't really go looking for trouble anymore. I don't try to convince people anymore. Partially because I feel like I've done my job and I'm exhausted by it, but also too, I don't have the patience to listen to anybody's lies or bullshit anymore. And I don't have the bandwidth to fight it. It's just so endless, you know. I'm sure you've seen those graphs, you know, of like how much energy it takes to like fix or change one lie. And the thing is that they're not invested in each particular lie. They just need the lies as the means towards their end. So there's nothing that I can actually tell people who aren't going to get vaccinated right now that, you know, that they should. For instance, I have two coworkers who didn't get vaccinated. They got religious. Well, one got a medical exemption, one got a religious exemption. They both have COVID right now. So like, what, you know, wow. If they who were there in the horrors with me didn't see the value in science, like, yeah. Sorry, that was very scattered, Scott.
No, I think but not at all. I mean, I think it's, and we've talked about this before. We realize that there's just a population out there that's not, you can't.
I'm kicking my cat out. She can't be trusted. I thought this would be the one podcast I could trust her with, but no.
No, it's just that, you know, evidence, people just see evidence differently. I'm trying to be very generous and even here, but, you know, I mean, I think it's, you know, even evidence, even showing people dying, that there will be people who say, yeah, I'm not gonna do that.
Well, and you know, everyone always thinks they're the exception to the rule, right? I recently had this, it was very interesting at work. I had this patient in February, and then I had them like 2 weeks ago when they finally died. And their family had convinced them that they were going to be safe, that they lived a quiet enough life, that there was no way that they were ever going to get COVID. And they had a birthday party, and somebody who knew that they were infected with COVID showed up to the birthday party and got this octogenarian member of their family sick. And I can tell this story because it's happened a million times all over the United States. And so I was there with them the morning they were going to get intubated, and I was like, we're making all the phone calls now. Let's go. And so, so I gave them the phone. Well, I explained briefly to the family what was going to happen. And then I gave them the phone, and they started talking to their family member about, like, trying to get their family member to talk to them about, how bad are your breathing problems? Can't you get the antibodies and stuff? And I was still in there in my gown waiting to get my phone back. And I picked up the phone and I was like, this is not the time for that conversation. This is the time to talk about things that really matter and get some good moments in. And then they're like, are you telling me that my loved one is going to die? And they start screaming on the phone at me. And I'm like, I can't predict the future, but bad things sometimes happen when people get COVID. So this is your chance to talk to them, okay? I give the phone back and they start praying and singing or listening to songs and stuff, and they have like this final moment, and I get my phone back at the end of it, clean it off, they get intubated, and I get to leave the room. And then like 3 hours later, I have to call them back to get permission for us to do another procedure on this patient. And it's so funny. They're like, and this mean lady doctor told us that my loved one was going to die. And I was like, well, full disclosure, that was me. I'm a nurse.
But that's the title of your next book, Mean Lady Doctor.
I was like, and I wasn't trying to be mean to you. I wanted you to get to the stage where you had a chance for meaningful conversations. And I heard you guys praying, and I heard you guys singing songs to them. And so I know that that was a good thing. And they calmed down. And then like maybe a week and a half ago, that patient wound up passing on my shift. And that was kind of like that they happened to be the last COVID patient we had in my ICU. So that was kind of like my last kind of COVID bridge there. And hopefully it stays that way for a very long time or forever. That would be fine with me. But yeah, it it's strange to me in my heart that people were still getting sick with COVID this past winter when we all knew all the everything already, and the things that we needed to do to stay safe were so clearly marked, but people just couldn't manage to do them.
When you describe an intubation to a family, how granular do you get with that?
We just usually call it a breathing tube because it's just easier for people to understand. What happens on the far side of that is it's like the breathing tube is fairly rigid. It's more like an aquarium hose, which sometimes people have seen, or like a hose, and it's not flexible. And so when somebody's getting intubated, you say breathing tube, but then like a week or two pass, and then you kind of have to get more into depth about what its function is and how it works, because it's somewhat stiff, and it needs to be somewhat stiff so the patient can't bite down on it. It has the possibility to create erosion inside the mouth and throat structures. And so it's generally not good for people to have it in for long periods of time, because that was the thing is like families would be like, okay, well, just leave them on the breathing tube for forever. Let's see if they ever get better. And the thing is that they weren't going to. And eventually leaving a tube in would create wounds. And it is possible sometimes for us to, do tracheostomies, which is essentially like a breathing tube through this portion of the throat, which they don't have the opportunity to bite on. So it can be a little better for the body. But a lot of times, though, the vast majority of the time when you got to the ICU, your lungs were so shot that it wasn't going to make a difference long term. And one of the phrases that our palliative care team would use that I liked is that the patient is taking the choice away from us. And so because people don't want to feel like they're responsible for a loved one's death. But and it was true, though, oftentimes the patient was taking the choice away from us because their health was declining, and it wasn't about us killing them or putting them to sleep. It was about them, like they were going to die no matter what. How can we make this a graceful landing as possible?
I guess, if you don't mind, I just ask sort of a little bit more about that, because it must be a skill that you learn over time to know how much information to give to people.
Yes,
And
it's
too
hard.
much information can be like what you just described, I think I could hear that described about a loved one. And I think I have no idea, actually. Let me not say that because I have no idea how I would feel at all. I can imagine a hypothetical me that would say, okay, that's clear and thank you for that. Um, I might even ask additional questions, in which case you have other things to do, and you'd say that, let me point you to WebMD or wherever I need to go for that. But I'm curious, and then there must be other people that the minute you start the description, they get a look or they do a body language or something where you're low, where I don't want to go further with this. So I'm curious, are there legal requirements of how much you describe? Is it pretty much up to you to describe? I mean, these are not easy things to talk about.
It's a skill you gain with time, and the most important thing is, and so remember too, during COVID we didn't have visitation, so it wasn't physical, it was on the phone. So you couldn't really go off of body cues. But the most important thing we would do though is to have everybody be on the same page. Because if you have like some rogue staff member be like, oh yeah, people survive from this all the time, then they're gonna glom onto that one ray of sunshine and they're never gonna hear like the truth, So it's never worth sugarcoating anything, because we would all be hugely surprised and we would love to have like a miraculously good outcome, but those things never happen, or very, 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 very rarely happen. We would all rather be wrong about a miracle than that's bad phrasing. It we oh gosh, I was going to say this one way and I like spaced. If a miracle proved us wrong, that would be great, but because it's likely not, we're not doing you any favors by including it in the realm of possibility, and especially too as like COVID wore on and we knew the signs, we knew exactly how everything was going to go. We had the rhythm down, and we had the lung scans, right? We could look at people's lungs and be like, this is the kind of damage that you're not going to recover from. So but people would definitely be at home, and I don't blame them, like Googling and trying to figure out something that we could do differently to save their loved one. Absolutely. And we would kind of have to curtail that.
Just a quick reminder, you're listening to COVID Calls, and I'm talking to Cassie Alexander today. I've talked with Dr. Gabriel Boslett before about the Delta wave and the way that, sort of the knowledge accumulated from the first wave and into the second, and the kind of things that maybe people would miss. I suppose a lot of it's informal about the way that a team works, maybe even down to the level of how scheduling works and people's individual strengths and weaknesses on a care team. I wanted to ask you about that, and there's a complicating factor which we've talked about before, which is visiting nurses.
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of muscle memory did you have in Omicron that was gained at a very high price in the first wave? And did it matter so much that there were visitors coming in and out, or did you have what you needed no matter who was showing up?
So I feel very lucky at my facility. All of our traveling nurses that we've gotten basically were battle hardened by COVID already. So I would say like our first probably 6 months of COVID, we didn't need any travelers because we still had enough staff. People hadn't retired yet or gone on to get other jobs themselves. So there's just a rhythm when you have a COVID patient that you're going to fall into, depending on how they present, how bad their lungs are. Are you going to prone them? What's their blood pressure? Are they going to need blood pressure medications that would require a central line? Do you need an arterial line because you need to keep a lifetime measure of how their blood pressure is going to go? And so we just recently, though, because we've had so many people leave my hospital, we're maybe like a third to a half travelers on any given shift. And they're very good travelers still so far, but they just, and these are entirely different travelers. We've like had several sets go through. They just don't know like how our hospital does things. That's the gap. So if you told them they had to go, to the MRI when they didn't have a transporter with them or something, for some reason, they wouldn't know where that was, or they wouldn't know what color tubes to use, or they aren't as intimately familiar with where the crash cart is, where all these sorts of things are. And so right now, I work at a facility, which I love, that we foster a culture of learning, and we try to help one another out. And so they feel really free about asking us questions, and when we support them, because we want everyone to have a good outcome. But we are talking about going on a strike in April, and that's going to be really interesting. And I've talked to some of the travelers about that, whose contracts extend through the strike, and they're super nervous. Because they know that they don't know everything, the ins and outs of how our hospital runs, or who to contact if certain things go badly. And so yeah, that's going to be really interesting times for them there, but not me, because I'll be striking.
What's precipitating the strike? I mean, I can't believe
it. So yeah, so you know how the cost of living has gone up so much in America right now. It has. They want to take my hospital system wants to take away certain vacation days from us, and then they also don't want to give us an appropriate cost of living increase. And we haven't gotten a cost of living increase to actually match the cost of living increase in America for like the past 3 years. So technically, like, we're making less now than we were back then, like proportionally how our dollars will spend. And they want to continue to shaft us. So yesterday, I participated in a system-wide pre-picket line where we picketed outside of our hospital to show them that we were very interested in going on strike. And then next week, we're going to vote on going on strike. And everybody I know is voting yes. We're all very much over feeling taken advantage of by our hospital. And so then sometime in April, we'll actually go on strike, and that will be great, because we're all kind of treating it like a mini vacation. I think we've all known this was coming down the pipe for so long that people have saved up money, because you're not allowed to use your own PTO to pay for stuff while you're on strike. You're just expected to eat that. But like, at the thought of having like a week or two away from work, everybody's thrilled. So
with the large population of traveling nurses, is that a way that the hospital will cope with that?
They're going to try, and it will be interesting. We had a strike. The respiratory therapists at my hospital had to have a strike about a year ago, and we were there that day because our unions are different. And it was a respiratory therapist and all of our lab techs, and that was a shit show. We had a transfusion reaction that day to blood. The lab had no idea what to do. The people working the CT scanner didn't really know how to operate it. And after 2 days, they got enough of their demands met that they could come back to the table, they felt. So we'll see how administration works with meeting our demands, but we're all ready to be out for as long as it takes, and pretty excited about that, which I don't think they realize how hard we will be to replace and how eager we are to have a break. And also too, they just think I don't know, for some reason they think nursing is easy, and it's interesting. I'm sorry, Scott, very digression-y this morning. Before I went back to work at my facility, I signed up for all these websites that do travel nursing, because I thought, maybe this is something that I could do. If I wound up super hating my job, if I was going to sell my soul, at least I could sell it to the highest bidder. And so I see travel nursing contracts come through, so I know what they're costing right now, but I also know what strike travel nursing costs, because people who cross lines, you have to pay them twice as much, right?
Right.
So I don't know, you're not tied into nurse Twitter, but like a couple weeks ago, everybody's like, oh my God, they're paying $13,000 a week for nurses in Washington, D.C. That was a strike contract. So the thought that my hospital system might have to pay like hundreds of people $13,000 a week to cross our picket line, It's interesting math. It's been a whole lot of robbing Peter to pay Paul this whole time. So
I would have expected that there would have already been strikes, or maybe there have been, and I have missed it, that all across America, and I guess it puts into relief. You can talk me out of this or tell me I'm naive. I mean, there's still this sort of sense of like doing the job, the mission, to try to give the benefit of the doubt to the leadership. I guess that's all at this point. It's exhausted. Huh?
Yeah, no, that's been burned away by reality. But most nurses don't have unions. So right. we're very lucky in California for that to be a thing. So the reason that we have that is because during the AIDS crisis, so many nurses fled the Bay Area, that the nurses who remained, because they didn't know how things worked and they were panicked. So the nurses that remained were had a lot of bargaining power. And so that's how come the Bay Area in California became such a powerhouse of nursing unions. And some other states have them, but a lot of times you're just right to work or you're not allowed to have them, like in Texas and stuff, I think. So those people, so rather than unionize, those people are just leaving. They're just coming to fulfill our travel contracts, basically. So
I think if you wanted an object lesson in why capitalism is not sustainable in the way it is in the United States, you just look at the health system pre-COVID.
Yeah.
And it comes back, I think, to your book, You're the Nurse, and something the first time we talked, you went on this amazing riff about, which I've used in class, about don't give us a pizza party.
Yeah.
Don't treat us like third graders. Like,
yeah.
Yeah, we can have mental health, support, and we can have, I don't know what a paperweight for nurses, or a little placard that's great, but also pay us.
Yeah. We want to see meaningful change, and meaningful change is better staffing ratios and enough staff and money, and that's just how America works. So we're done being taken advantage of, and I think COVID, I don't want to say the only good thing to come out of COVID, because that makes it sound like I was pro-COVID, but it's definitely lifted the veil from our eyes as far as our personal worth and integrity, according to our hospital administration.
So the rush to normal is real. The United States Senate is moving to override mask mandates in public transportation. I think that probably won't pass. That Biden will veto that. But it's hard to get any consensus in the United States Senate. But it seems to be you can get consensus on the idea that the pandemic is over.
Yeah, I saw that yesterday, and I was like, motherfuckers. I don't understand what the big rush to end the mask mandates is. Like, I feel like by now we should have learned our lesson that anytime you want to end mask mandates, we should just all wait like 2 or 3 weeks. What's the harm in keeping on? It's not so bad. And I guess we as a people have learned nothing. So, but I had to go to the grocery store after my shift yesterday, or not my shift, the day before yesterday. And everybody here in California, at least in Oakland, in the grocery store, had their masks on still. And I'm anticipating that to keep going on where I live for a while, because the Bay Area actually gives a shit about each other. So I don't know what I would do if I lived someplace else, though. Yeah. I need to go and visit my parents in Texas at some point in time.
Yeah.
And I just can't even conceive of managing that.
How are you going to do it? I have to go too. I'm going to try to go in July.
I have no idea, Scott. I mean, like, between the fact that my parents aren't boosted and that I want to wear a mask and that I don't really want to go out in public, I haven't even really conceived of how I'm going to make it work. And it's hard, right? They're getting older, and I want to be a good kid.
Yeah.
And we just don't see eye to eye on these things clearly. And also, too, I don't want to get any flack for it, Like in the past, I've stayed at their place and I haven't had my own mode of transportation. If I go on this trip, and that's still a big if, I will definitely have my own hotel room someplace and a car. and be able to escape. So if if a relative corners me and starts being all talking in my ear bullshit about COVID, I'm just going to leave. I don't want to have a panic attack in front of other people anymore. And I don't deserve it. So I'm just going to go. But yeah.
Do you think if you'd been a nurse in January of 2020 in San Antonio or Austin or Houston, you'd still be in the profession?
No. I mean, unless I were financially obligated so that I had to stay there, right? That's the thing. So we have some travelers now. I love them. There's these boys who've been coming over from the East Coast, but they've been working their way across the country. And their most recent contract was in Colorado during like the lead up to this winter with Omicron there. And they were taking 3 to 4 ICU patients, which is insane. And they were only getting paid $29 an hour. And we just stared at them in the break room when they told us that. One of my coworkers said, I would have just gone home. And that's true. Like, that sounds so classist. So for people who don't know how nursing money works, and if you don't make as much as we do, I'm very sorry about that. But please trust me, we earn it. And yeah, there's so many places where nurses aren't getting paid enough to get by or enough to be worth staying. And we kind of talked about this last COVID calls, right? Where they were talking about like Kentucky opening up so many slots in nursing schools, like 1,000 people are going to go through nursing school with a scholarship. Well, that's great. How are you going to keep them in Kentucky?
Yeah,
why would you stay in Kentucky and get paid like $20 an hour when you could go to either coast and make at least 40, So yeah. So if I'd been in Texas, I would have not become a nurse, or I would have left probably. At least I'm paid decently for where I am, although more is always better.
Well, there is going to be an amazing set of books or movies. I'm not sure how it's going to come out about traveling nurses in COVID. I mean, every time I've talked to you, you have these stories, and it's like, and I'm sure people have so many different reasons that they did it. I mean, economic, of course, and maybe other motivations to. Adventure is the wrong word, but the sense of service or to get away from a situation you want to get away from.
In a way, this is kind of a silly thing. It just came to mind, though. It's almost like Great Depression, right? They're moving to make money, and yeah, there's a bunch of stories in that. A lot of them live someplace fairly cheap, and then they like work very hard, and then they go and live cheaply for as long as they can and come back. Yeah. Like healthcare mercenaries in a way, only very helpful, and we like to see them.
We're almost out of time. Just a quick reminder that you're listening to COVID Calls, and I'm talking to Cassie Alexander today, the author of Year of the Nurse. And I wanted to ask you kind of a hard question about, and it's kind of about mental health, and it's about moral injury and caregiving. And I've talked to lots of healthcare workers lately who have a real sense of exhaustion, resignation, still doing the job, but I think it's fair to say that you've seen the worst of people, not just physically, but also, what the kind of harm people can do by not trusting science or not trusting you and everything that goes with that. My question is it somehow easier to deal with that now because you've seen it, because the expectation has been lowered? I mean, this is a hard question because it's like, because you've given up on humanity, and I don't mean that. But I do mean there's a sense of like, you've seen it now, and so maybe you're not as vulnerable to it as you would have been in April or May of 2020, or is that not the right way to think about this?
No, definitely parts of my heart have become very hard. They have just had to be to survive. Like, full disclosure, when my mom told me on the phone that they weren't getting boosted, this was like this past winter, when Omicron was still hitting, and I was just like, and my mother, who is a person who I do love, but we have had contentious relationship, and I curse a lot. Anyways, I was just like, why are you telling me this? Fuck you. And I hung up on her. I was so mad. I just couldn't even handle it. So clearly I don't have fantastic coping mechanisms all the time. I called her back, and then we talked about it, and she gave me her reasons. But you just learn not to care as much. Like I I feel like such a liar sometimes. At the end of the year of the nurse, I made such a big point of saying, you shouldn't break your healthcare workers. You want us to care whether you live or die. These things are true, but right now we just are broken, and I feel bad, but a lot of us, we just don't care like we used to. We just can't. We don't have the bandwidth, and to some degree we can't be bothered. It's just, we've already given so much that there's just nothing left. And now that we're kind of moving away from COVID care, it's going to take a while for that well to be refilled, if ever, because a lot of times once you develop coping mechanisms, they're not anything that you don't let go of them, right? You just keep on keeping on because it's safer that way. I had an incident at work though recently, which kind of made me cry, and it wasn't COVID related, but it was because I was put in a helpless situation again though, and I was so frustrated, and that was just, I kind of had like a nice window after that poor lady had died. There was no moral distress there for a while, and then I was recently in this situation where I was just between a rock and a hard place for a person's outcome versus what we were able to do for them versus what administration was able to do for us in regarding to end of life visitation. And I just like, oh, this is what this feels like again, to know that you're not going to win. You're going to be a disappointment to everybody involved. And this time they're here to tell it to your face. And that was miserable. I just came out of that room thinking, oh, this is awful. I wish I had another job. So we'll see how that goes in the future. I think people don't realize what the linchpin that nursing is for all the rest of the care that you receive, because we're the person talking to the nutritionist when you're hungry, we're talking to the doctor about your care as it happens, we're talking to physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. We're like your secretary. We're coordinating all of these people around you in a tornado of activity to make sure that you have all the things happen to you that are going to make you better. And but it's exhausting, right? Because sometimes what one group wants is opposed to what another group wants, and you kind of have to field that back and forth. It's like you're almost always trapped in this mommy and daddy are fighting situation at work, where you're trying to make the best of a difficult situation because a patient wants something or the patient's family wants something. These things are irreconcilable, because of their health status. And sometimes it's something as small as like a patient just like yelling at you because they can't have gravy because they're diabetic and it's not allowed. And you're just like, I'm trying to save your life. Can you just not eat the gravy? And then other times it sits on a much bigger scale where you're explaining to somebody how come, monoclonal antibodies aren't appropriate for their person's care. But you're always disappointing somebody, and it's hard to have a job where disappointing people is a part of your job description, so.
Well, I just want to remind folks you've been listening to COVID Calls, and this has been one of the Restoring Memory episodes of COVID Calls, and I was so happy to have a chance to talk to Cassie Alexander again, who I always get about 10 hours of education and ideas for every hour that we spend together, and we're going to leave it there for now. I mean, even that last part you were talking about, that it doesn't matter if you're treating patients and it's a tough situation, it's going to bring back COVID for you, and that's trauma. I mean, that's PTSD, I guess, or some variant of that. And since we're still in the middle of this thing, we don't know how long that's going to last. Thank you for just describing that in such a comprehensible way to a person who's never taken care of anybody other than using a thermometer and over the counter medicine.
Real fast, Scott, before you let me go too, I have to make a prediction for the future. If we hit another wave, the wheels are going to fall off. Like America is not ready for it.
It's coming.
Yeah, it was almost this past winter. So many healthcare systems were so close to breaking down. Like even my own hospital, which has X amount of beds, had 1/3 more patients in it than we had beds. Like they were doubling up beds on floors single rooms that were never meant to be doubled. So if we have another wave of BA.2 comes through and is wild, or some other variant comes up, like we're just not, the healthcare system isn't going to be able to withstand that again. Just as an FYI.
Well, I predict if you can make time to do it, that we'll get a chance to talk in the next couple of months about where we are with that. But thanks for being part of this special group of episodes, and thanks for always just being so honest about what you're going through. I appreciate it, Cassie.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. This is always been fun.
Stay healthy, everybody. We'll see you next time on COVID Calls. And in fact, in just 5 minutes, you can catch another COVID Calls episode. I'll be talking to Greg Gonsalves, welcoming him back to COVID Calls. So please do tune in for that.